The Kolvar Empire had ruled the Andromeda sector for 3,000 cycles, and in all that time, no species had ever challenged their dominance. Their secret weapon was simple. Lyra, the last of the Dracathi, a creature of nightmare and flame, whose very existence kept entire star systems in terrified submission. Lyra was not merely large. She was a living apocalypse. Her scales shimmered like molten obsidian, each one harder than reinforced durasteel. Her wings could blot out suns and her roar could shatter mountains. The Kolvar kept her in the deepest pit of their fortress world, feeding her the criminals and rebels who dared oppose their rule. It was said that Lyra had consumed over 10,000 sentient beings, and her hunger never ceased. When humanity first made contact with the Kolvar, they were warned. Bend the knee or face the dragon. Humanity, in their typical fashion, chose defiance. The war lasted 3 months. It was brutal, swift, and utterly one-sided. Human ships fell like rain before the Kolvar armada, and their colonies burned. In desperation, humanity sued for peace. The Kolvar agreed, but their terms were cruel. As tribute for their insolence, humanity would send one of their young to feed Lyra. A symbolic gesture, the Kolvar Emperor had said, his mandibles clicking with amusement, so that you never forget your place. The human delegation had no choice. They returned to Earth with heavy hearts, and the debate that followed nearly tore their government apart. But in the end, they made their decision. They would send a volunteer, someone who understood what was at stake. Evan was 8 years old. He hadn't volunteered, not exactly, but when his mother, Admiral Sarah Chen, explained what was needed, he'd simply nodded. He had his father's eyes that had seen the refugee ships, the burned worlds, the families torn apart by war. Eyes too old for his small frame, will it hurt? He'd asked quietly. His mother couldn't answer. She'd simply held him. The Kolvar made a spectacle of it. Representatives from a dozen species were invited to witness the feeding, a reminder of what happened to those who defied the Empire. Evan was brought in chains, though he walked calmly, his small hand clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. The arena was vast, carved from the living rock of the fortress world, and at its center was the pit, Lyra's pit. The Kolvar Emperor stood on his platform, arms spread wide. Behold the price of human arrogance. They threw Evan into the darkness. He fell for what seemed like forever, the air growing hotter with each passing second. When he finally hit the ground, he expected death. Instead, he found only stone, warm stone, and the sound of breathing. Massive rumbling breathing that shook his bones. Then light. Not the harsh artificial light from above, but a dim crimson glow. Lyra emerged from the shadows, and Evan's breath caught in his throat. She was even more magnificent than the story suggested. Her eyes were like dying stars, ancient and weary, and they fixed upon him with an intelligence that was terrifyingly profound. Evan should have run, should have screamed. But he was his mother's son, and fear would change nothing. Instead, he sat down and pulled out his stuffed rabbit. "Hello," he said softly. "My name is Evan. I'm sorry they made you eat people." "That must be awful." Lyra's massive head tilted, her pupils narrowing to slits. In 3,000 cycles, not one of her meals had ever spoken to her with anything but curses or pleas. She leaned closer, her breath hot enough to singe his hair, and growled, a sound that should have turned his bones to jelly. Evan didn't flinch. He held up the rabbit. "This is Mr. Hopsworth. He's been with me since I was 4. Would you like to see him?" Something changed in Lyra's eyes. She lowered her head until it rested on the ground before him, and for the first time in millennia, she made a sound that wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a whimper, soft, broken, and infinitely sad. Evan understood then. Lyra wasn't a monster. She was a prisoner just like he was. He stood up and walked to her, his small hand reaching out to touch the scales on her snout. They were warm and they trembled beneath his palm. "It's okay," he whispered. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Above, the Kolvar Emperor waited. The crowds waited. Minutes passed. Then hours. No screams came from the pit, no sounds of feeding. Finally, curious and irritated, the Emperor ordered his guards to investigate. What they found defied explanation. Evan sat nestled between Lyra's massive claws, asleep, his rabbit tucked under his arm. And Lyra, the terror of the Andromeda sector, the devourer of worlds, stood guard over him with a protectiveness that bordered on sacred. Her eyes, when they turned on the guards, held a warning that transcended language. Touch him and die. The Emperor was furious. He ordered his soldiers to retrieve the child, to force Lyra back into submission. But Lyra had made her choice. When the first soldier descended, she unleashed 3,000 cycles of rage in a single, cataclysmic roar. The fortress world shook. Mountains crumbled. And for the first time in recorded history, Lyra broke free from her chains. She rose from the pit with Evan on her back, her wings unfurling to blot out the sky. The Kolvar fleet scrambled, but they had never fought their own weapon before. City after city fell as Lyra carved a path of freedom through the fortress world. And not once did she harm the human child who had shown her kindness when the galaxy had shown her only cruelty. By the time humanity's rescue ships arrived, the Kolvar Empire was in chaos. Their invincible dragon had become humanity's guardian, and the balance of power in Andromeda had shifted forever. Admiral Chen found her son sleeping peacefully in the shadow of Lyra's wing. When Evan woke, he smiled. "Mom, this is Lyra. She's my friend now. Can we take her home?" Sarah Chen looked up at the massive dragon, who gazed back with eyes that held both a question and a plea. "Yes," the Admiral said softly. "Yes, we can. No one could have predicted it. The fierce alien dragon and the innocent human child. But that was humanity's gift to the galaxy, the ability to see people, not monsters, even in the darkest of places. And sometimes that made all the difference."